And liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
In the morning of January 28, 1986, millions of people gathered around their TV screens. School children sat cross-legged on the floor as teachers rolled in those bulky TV carts, and parents delayed going to work. Because that morning wasn't just any old rocket launch. That morning, for the first time in history, a civilian, a school teacher, Krista McAuliffe, was being launched into space. "73 seconds after launch, Challenger exploded. The shuttle disintegrated across the sky, and 7 astronauts lost their lives. What no one ever learned was this. Though that disaster was an accident, it wasn't a mystery, and it wasn't unavoidable, because 3 men tried desperately to stop it. This is the interesting true story of Roger Boisjoly, Bob Ebeling, and Alan McDonald, the men who tried to stop the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Roger Boisjoly wasn't a politician, he wasn't a NASA executive, and he was not a risk taker. He was an engineer, a reserved, deeply principled mechanical engineer working for Morton Thiokol. That's the company responsible for the solid rocket boosters aboard the Space Shuttle. And those boosters were enormous, each one taller than the Statue of Liberty. And they were sealed with rubber rings called O-rings. O-rings are supposed to be simple. They expand when hot gases press against them, sealing the joint and preventing flames from escaping. But Roger noticed something troubling. During earlier shuttle launches, he noticed evidence of erosion on the O-rings, little burn marks where hot gases had nearly escaped. Sometimes the damage was minor, sometimes it was frighteningly close to catastrophic. Roger did not shrug this off. He documented it, he noticed it, and he warned management. And he also discovered something even more troubling, that the O-rings became brittle in cold temperatures. And cold was a problem that Florida was experiencing on the morning of the Challenger launch. The night before the launch, temperatures at Cape Canaveral dropped to the low 30s in Fahrenheit. That's about 0 in Celsius, freezing temperatures, much colder than any previous launch. Ice coated the launch pad and hung from metal structures, and Roger Boisjoly was alarmed. So was Bob Ebeling, another senior engineer at Morton Thiokol. Bob had spent decades designing rocket components, so he understood heat, pressure, and failure. He knew that the O-rings had never been tested at such low temperatures, so together he and Roger compiled graphs, charts, and flight histories, and they noticed a pattern. The colder the temperature, the more damage to the O-rings. And this would be the coldest launch ever. The risk wasn't just theoretical. If the O-rings failed, a jet of flame would escape, cutting into the main external fuel tank. And if that happened, the Challenger would explode. Bob Ebeling was shook. He went home that night and sat with his wife. And after all the things that he had seen, all the data and all the warnings and all the arguments, he turned to her and he said something chilling. It's going to blow up. Not, it could blow up, or it might blow up. He said, it's going to blow up. On the evening of January 27, 1986, a tense teleconference was held between engineers at Morton Thiokol in Utah, the managers of Morton Thiokol, and NASA officials in both Florida and in Texas. Roger Boisjoly spoke first, and then Bob Ebeling. They were clear, they were direct, and they were unequivocal. Do not launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit, about 12 degrees Celsius. The next day's forecast was far colder than that. Roger Boisjoly would later go on to say that it was one of the most important moments of his life. He said to them plainly, "If we launch tomorrow, I'm afraid we will lose the vehicle and the crew." And that was followed by silence. Then, NASA officials started to push back. They said they wanted proof. Not concern or engineering judgment, as you would ask for from your engineers. They said they wanted proof. One NASA official even said, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want us to launch? Next April?" The pressure mounted. Schedules mattered. Politics mattered. Public relations mattered, but safety somehow became negotiable. Then something happened that would haunt the engineers forever. Morton Thiokol called a private caucus without NASA on the line. Roger and Bob thought that they would get some support, but instead, they watched their own company turn against them. Managers talked about contracts, about their relationship with NASA, about not embarrassing the agency. One senior manager even said, "Take off your engineering hats and put on your manager hats." Roger was stunned. To him, and to any good engineer, engineering is not a hat. It's a responsibility. When the launch resumed, Morton Thiokol reversed its recommendation. They told NASA that the launch was acceptable. Roger Boisjoly later remarked that he felt physically ill. Bob Ebeling put his face in his hands. He had already told his wife what he thought was going to happen. But now, the launch was going anyway. One man refused to go along, Alan MacDonald, the director of the solid rocket motor project at Thiokol. Alan was on site in Florida, and when he heard that the launch was a go, he was furious. He confronted NASA managers face to face. He said he would not sign off on the launch. He told them plainly, "This is not safe." But NASA launched anyway. So Alan MacDonald watched the Space Shuttle Challenger lift off, knowing what was coming. He later actually said, "I felt helpless. I knew what was coming." The countdown reached 0, and the Challenger raised into the sky, trailing fire and smoke. At 73 seconds into the launch, a black puff of smoke can be seen on the right booster. That was the O-ring. Flame escaped. It burned through a support strut. The external fuel tank ruptured, and the shuttle was torn apart in midair. Roger Boisjoly was watching on TV at home. Bob Ebeling, upon seeing the explosion, collapsed. And Alan MacDonald stood frozen at the launch site, all three of them instantly knowing this was the failure they had predicted. The nation mourned, and NASA promised answers.
The media is showing footage of the launch today from the NASA Select system. We will not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion based on that footage. It will take all the data, careful review of that data, before we can draw any conclusions on this national tragedy. Thank you.
But behind closed doors, something darker happened. During the investigation, both Morton Thiokol and NASA downplayed the engineers' warnings. Roger Boisjoly was pressured to stay quiet. But when he testified honestly in front of the Presidential Commission, he became a problem. He was labeled as disloyal, and his career unraveled. Roger suffered from depression and severe PTSD. Bob Ebeling carried overwhelming guilt. He was haunted by the fact that he had said the words out loud and still watched them come true. Alan MacDonald continued to fight, publicly, relentlessly for the truth. And eventually, the truth came out. The engineers were right. The disaster was avoidable. None of the men became heroes at the time. There was no promotions or medals, just consequences. Roger Boisjoly left the aerospace industry entirely. Bob Ebeling, he carried the weight of that for the rest of his life. And Alan MacDonald went on to teach engineering ethics because he was determined that something like this would never happen again. Each one of them paid a heavy price for doing the right thing. The Challenger disaster was not caused by technology. It was caused by people ignoring experts, by schedules overriding safety, by managers ignoring engineers, and by warning signs being dismissed as inconvenient. Roger Boisjoly, Bob Ebeling, and Alan MacDonald did not fail. They did their jobs. They told the truth. And they proved something terrifying. That in the world of science, the scariest thing you can hear isn't, "We don't know." It's, "We're going anyway." If you'd like to see more interesting true stories like this one, please like, subscribe, and hit the notifications for a new episode every week. What do you think? Would you have said something had you known before the disaster? Could you have spoken up, even though you know your career might have been in jeopardy? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next interesting true stories.